Valve might have Steam, but From Software has something that Valve could only ever dream of. A wildly popular franchise that actually made it to its third game. In today's humble opinion, we're praising the sun in Dark Souls 3. Now, I've not got that much experience with the Souls series. I got as far as the second boss in Demon Souls, and I'm about halfway through the original Dark Souls. Even when it comes to Dark Souls 3, I've only just about made it to the first real boss, so you'll have to take this review with a grain of salt, but all things considered, I think I've had enough of the game to give a reasonable opinion. Dark Souls 3 isn't a good game. Now, I get that opinion is pretty controversial, and you might be thinking I'm full of shit because I just talked about how little I've actually experienced of the game, but my position is actually a bit unique in that I'm simultaneously experiencing my first playthrough of the original at the same time as my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3. I can see where the series has changed and diverged from its original course, and I can say meaningful things about them. So what is it that makes Dark Souls 3 not good? Well, for starters, look at the combat system. The original Dark Souls already walked the perilous line of challenging but fair gameplay. A good portion of the difficulty would come from the placement of easily dispatched enemies and the occasional tough enemy punctuated along the path for good measure. Dark Souls 3 makes every enemy a tough enemy and punctuates the path with extra tough enemies for good measure. And in between those, they sprinkle in a few uncommonly tough enemies. They've really taken that razor's edge of balance and filed away even more, and with so much variety, it's constantly got you feeling tense, unnerved, and oh holy shit, what the fuck is that? God, it just kills me in one hit. Plus the enemy AI has become absolutely pants on head bonkers. They fight much more quickly and much more savagely than previous iterations. Remember when spamming dodge roll was enough to save you most of the time? Yeah, well now it's more likely to kill you because the timing of the animations, the reach, and the enemy's ability to track your movements have all been tuned to fuck you over. Then if you manage to position yourself near the enemy's weak spot, they have no trouble whipping back around to keep it covered. Remember how Dark Souls was praised for challenging your understanding of how a game should work? Well, Dark Souls 3 is challenging your understanding of how Dark Souls should work. Watch as your health bar dodge rolls right off the goddamn screen. I thought for sure that my moderate experience with the Souls series would give me enough skill to make it through the tutorial, but it still took me over an hour. And besides the boss, the tutorial area has two other completely batshit encounters that no one could possibly be prepared for on their first try. It's nuts. Anyone who looks at this and tells me it's a good game is blatantly lying, both to themselves and to me, especially when the story is told through such a nuanced manner, with cryptic riddles and vague hints like Firelink Shrine, as in Firelink Shrine, or are there multiple shrines linked together by fire, as in this is a Firelink Shrine? The bell that was ringing, was that the Bell of Awakening? What the fuck is Andre doing here? Then this must be the same Firelink, but what happened to all the rest of this place by the time it got to Dark Souls 1? What's the nature and role of the Unkindled in comparison to the Chosen Undead? What's the deal with this guy and why does he have a bonfire sword stuck in him? Why did no one else claim it or seem to be pleased with its return? So many questions left unanswered unless you care enough to look them up on your own and piece everything together. You call that good storytelling? I suppose next you're going to be telling me that the Sistine Chapel has some good murals or that Shakespeare was a good poet. Dark Souls 3 isn't a good game, it's a fantastic game. The series itself is a masterpiece, and this entry into its ranks doesn't pull any stops. It demonstrates excellently an evolution that has taken place over the course of the series to grow with the skill of its player base while retaining its rigorous yet conquerable foundation for new players. The tutorial area alone shows how it's progressed and matured into what it is today. The level is shorter with only a handful of enemies between the start and the first boss. In that short trek, they offer a few diverging paths. One leads you to a reward at the end of a canal, which encourages you to explore. The other leads you to an enemy that is a lot more challenging than you would expect to just be out in the open in a place that teaches you the basics of the game. The lesson in this case is feel free to test your mettle, but don't be afraid to turn back and engage it at a later time. Also in the tutorial is an item that can't be reached without jumping from a higher ledge, telling new players that they should be vigilant of their paths and understand how the map is constructed in order to make sure they get everything. A lesson that I found to be particularly interesting was the lesson that the tricks you've used in Dark Souls aren't going to work here. You learn this lesson when you strike what appears to be the most basic of enemies that have been dying with one strike, and it actually takes two. Having survived with a sliver of health so small that you might expect that it's died, only to have it attack you moments later as you turn to walk away. They're all lessons that remain true throughout the entire experience. Dark Souls 3 earns a perfect 10 out of 10 in gameplay because of how well put together it is. The tutorial is one of the most well crafted I've seen of the series so far and reflects the subtle transformation the game has gone through over the years incredibly well. It also takes ideas that have worked from previous titles and pulled them together for a more cohesive experience. Firelink Shrine, for instance, reminds me a lot of the hub in Demon Souls, as does the use of focus points rather than a limitation on spells. that really actually does a lot to make attunement more significant. The game feels much more streamlined in that it's made more polished quality of life changes like that, but it hasn't let up on the overall experience expected of a Dark Souls title. In some ways, I'd say that it's the Dark Souls of Dark Souls, and it does it right. Thank you everyone for watching, and a special thanks to From Software for having made such a tremendously prolific series and continue to produce it with this degree of quality and consideration. It's no wonder so many people look to these games as a benchmark for what sorts of experience a game should deliver. If you've enjoyed this review, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and until next time, remember that failure is not the worst case scenario. To glow on with your bad selves and stay awesome.